going to start right at 10 o'clock. Okay, we'll give it just about another minute or so, and then we can go ahead and get started. Sophia, can you confirm I've got okay audio right now? Can you hear me okay, Sophia? Okay, we'll go ahead and get started today. I wanted to start on time. We have a pretty full agenda and wanting to try to stay on track to finish our meeting on time. So I want to thank you for joining us today and welcome to the 23rd installment of our Index Fresh seminar series. This is our first webinar Zoom presentation for a cultural meeting. We've recently done a few market updates on Zoom, and they've been a good way for us to get together during the social distancing requirements. Before we get started, I would like to review some instructions for today's meeting. We've updated our Zoom format to a webinar version, which all participants have been muted during this presentation. It's best if we utilize the Q&A option, which is at the bottom of your toolbar on the bottom of your screen. You can type and send questions to our panelists during any of the presentations. We do have a participant panel. They're available to answer your questions that you may have. We'll try to answer all your questions after each presentation. We can keep the meeting open after our final presentation if we have any further questions and are having a good discussion. I would like to let you know that today's meeting is being recorded. We will be posting it to our website so that growers who are not able to attend today will have the opportunity to review today's seminar. This seminar is focused on a topic that has become more and more relevant, the topic of orchard cooling. In the past few years, we've seen consistently higher than normal temperatures and for longer durations. Damages caused by these extreme temperatures have had devastating consequences throughout the state. The other segments of today's meeting to share with you are some cultural inputs that growers are utilizing to increase their yields. And we've had our editor, John Cornell, go out into the field and do some pre-recorded grower interviews that we'll be sharing. On our discussion panel to help answer your questions, we have Mary Lou Arpaia from UC Riverside. And as I mentioned, John Cornell is a grower from Temecula, and he's the editor of our index publications, like the Index Insider. John has helped with our grower interviews that we'll be presenting today. We also have on the Zoom call, Gerardo Altonate is joining us from his home in Chile. Gerardo has been consulting with index growers for over 4 years as our in-house agronomist, and he's been working with several growers in California for 15 plus years. So Gerardo's got an extensive experience advising growers in all growing regions throughout the state. Also, we have Matt Nelson is joining us from Temecula. Matt will be available after his video interview to answer any questions about his overhead irrigation system for cooling. And also John Rowley from Nelson Irrigation. He's in Washington State and will be available to answer questions about his presentation, also on orchard cooling. We also have, not on our panel, but attending today's meeting, a grower in Carpinteria, Nick Coetzee. And Nick has been using a system probably longer than anybody in the avocado business. He's had one running since 2008. So Nick has some good experience and may be able to help answer any additional questions. So to get started on our agenda for today, our first presentation will be an update from Farm ACW that Mary Lou Arpaia will be doing, and updating us on some cultural inputs that they're doing with mulch and utilization of some pollenizers in the field. Our second presentation will be the recorded interview that we've done with Zach Rissell from La Patera Ranch in Goleta. And Zach will be talking about some of the inputs they've been implementing from Gerardo's consulting program. Our third presentation is a recorded interview with Matt Nelson. Again, Matt will be talking about his use of overhead irrigation for cooling needs. And we'll then be hearing from Mr. Gerardo Altonate on some October cultural tips that we can be applying in the field during the fall growing season. And our final, last but not least, presentation will be from John Rowley at Nelson Irrigation. And John will be introducing us to orchard cooling systems and how growers in Washington State are using overhead irrigation to protect apple and pear crops during heat events. So that is our agenda for today, and I would like to go ahead and get started with the presentation from Mary Lou Arpaia about Farm ACW.
Thank you, Keith. Let me get the screen shared here. So hopefully people can see that.
It is populating slowly. You're good, Mary Lou.
Oh, good. Thank you, Keith. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm talking today not as Mary Lou Arpaia, a cooperative extension specialist and researcher. Today I'm talking to you on behalf of Farm ACW. And they wanted to share with you some of the lessons they've learned over since 1970 when the ranch was established on cultural practices that they think make a big difference in overall productivity of the tree. So just some quick facts about Farm ACW. It's located in Duluth, which is near about 10 miles west of the city of Fallbrook. It was purchased, as I said, in 1969. Actually, the property was purchased, the first segment of the property, and it's been under continual development, as the owner says, since that time. The place burnt to the ground in 1975, and so what is today at the ranch has been rebuilt since 1975. The farm went organic about 15 years ago. And so now they're one of the largest organic growers of Hass, Gem, Lamb Hass, and many other varieties, because one of the things that the farm believes in is a diversity of varieties. The property is a little bit over 1,000 acres with currently a little bit over 500 acres planted. So the two takeaways that the owner wanted me to share with you today is their use of mulching to improve water retention and root health, and the use of pollenizers and honeybees to enhance productivity. So I'll cover mulching first. So they have been mulching, as I indicated, for about the last 10 to 15 years on an active basis. And they have 515 acres, and some of that is mature groves, mature plantings that you're not going to get mulch in. And those trees have a good leaf litter already built up. But what they're using the mulch for is when they go in, they're in the process of replanting the farm with new trees using newer rootstocks, because much of the property, the older trees are still planted on seedling rootstock, Sultano primarily, or first generation clonal rootstocks, which was Duke 7 predominantly. So they're adding the mulch to the new plantings, and also they're stumping and top working trees, and so they're using that opportunity as they clear that of coming in and adding mulch. Their mulch currently consists of, they buy partially composted material from a commercial operation in Oceanside, and then they mix into that material gypsum and chicken manure. So the chicken manure is for a lot of different reasons, but since they're an organic grower, this is an easy way to bring nitrogen into the grove. And so what you see in the first panel with the truck is the compost being delivered. And then you see below that the compost piles. They've actually, or have a large enough operation that they've bought a turner for the compost. And then what you see on the right-hand side of the slide is actually the final product. So what you see is that it's a very coarse compost, and they have learned from experience that you don't want to have what they call a lot of fines in that mulch. And so you can see it's a little bit of everything in there. And the real belief, the one reason that they really started using it is the belief that now that they say they've figured that where they've gone in and they've added the mulch, that they can save 15 to 20% of their water that they need to use in these young plantings, because the fact that the water is retained within that material. So why does mulching work? Well, it works for avocados because the trees are relatively shallow rooted, as you can see in the right-hand upper panel. This is actually a slide from Peru, but it just shows you how avocado roots can really, really grow right below, and this is right below their mulch layer. And you can see those nice, beautiful white roots. The lower panel is actually a slide of data that was collected in San Diego County and in Riverside County from a plot we had in Corona. You can see that the roots are predominantly in the top 8 centimeters or 3 to 4 inches of soil. And that's why the mulching does work, because avocados also have a high requirement for soil oxygen. And so by having a mulch layer, if you go out to your mature trees, the trees are self-mulching with the leaf litter. And if you go down out to your grove and you pull back that leaf litter, you'll find that you see all these beautiful white roots at that interface of the leaf mulch and the soil where the leaf litter is decomposing. So the mulching allows for water retention at the soil mulch interface, and so that helps. It's a stress mitigation protocol or a step that you can use. It provides the roots with the required oxygen because it allows the roots to come up to the surface. And when that material, as that material breaks down, you're adding organic matter to the soil. And that's very important, at least for Farm Acw, because their native soil only has 0.4% organic matter. And so that is insufficient to help an avocado tree. So I'll move on to the second lesson learned at the ranch is the use of honeybees and pollenizers that boost productivity. And like many growers, when the farm was replanted in the mid-1970s, when the farm was burnt to the ground, they didn't put pollenizers in, and they were using native bee. They were relying on the native bee population to pollinate the trees. And in the end, as varroa mite and other honeybee pests came in, they saw a decline of the feral bee population, and they also realized that they needed probably to have pollenizer varieties. So the limitations really are the flower biology of the avocado tree. We have these distinct male and female phases of the flower on an individual variety. But what helps us is that we have varieties that are either A or B flower types, and I'm not going to go into that today. The other thing is that we do need to move the pollen from flower to flower, because rarely is there overlap within the tree. And so the best commercial way to move pollen around in a grove is the honeybee. Now, there's also research showing that you can also use bumblebees to augment honeybees. That research is out of Israel, but it shows that bumblebees can augment but can't replace the honeybee. There's also papers in the literature that suggest that wind can move the pollen around. And I'm not here to tell you that it does not, but we have conducted experiments to say that if you rely on wind alone, you will not have very good fruit set. And that data was collected at Farm Acw, as well as a companion trial that we conducted in Chile. So those are the limitations. So how did Farm Acw get around it? They did two things. First of all, they planted multiple pollenizer varieties. So they're not relying only on Edinger or only on Zutano. They have Bacon, Edinger, Zutano, Charwa, which are all bee flower types, to help with the pollination of Hass and Gem and Lamb Hass that they have planted at the ranch. And what they've done is they've planted 3 avocado trees in an individual hole. I'm not advocating that you need to do that, but that's what they've done. But I think this picture that's on the right-hand side of the slide really shows you the fact that why that strategy works in planting multiple varieties. So this particular tree that you see is actually 3 trees, those 3 pollenizers. And you can see on the right side of the tree, that is flowering in full bloom. And on the left side of the tree, you can see flowers coming on, but they haven't opened yet. And this tree is surrounded by Hass trees. And if you could look carefully in the photograph, you would see that the Hass tree is more like the left side of the tree. So from year to year, you really don't know during that very long bloom time of the Hass, which pollenizer is going to be more in synchrony during that ideal days where we have the right temperature and the right humidity for fruit set. So by planting multiple pollenizers, it's sort of like an insurance policy that you're going to be able to help yourself. They currently use about 11% of the planting space in a particular grove is devoted to pollenizers. So that's every other tree, every other row. Now on the use of honeybees, they're following the advice of the work that was done in Israel of 4 hives per acre. They happen to have their own bee operation. Doesn't mean you need to do that, but they are large enough with 500 acres planted. They have their own bees. They're running about 3,000 hives. So they have 4 hives per acre. And then the other thing I wanted to show you in the bottom panel here is that long before they became an organic grower, they left the weeds in the grove during flowering. And in particular, they have done everything to promote the presence of mustard in the grove. And why is that? Because avocados are a good nectar source or carbohydrates for the honeybee, but the pollen is not preferred by the bee for different reasons that I won't go into today. But mustard pollen and wild radish pollen is a preferred pollen source, which is a protein source for the honeybee. And so by allowing mustard and wild radish to grow in the grove during the flowering season, the bees do not have to travel to look for pollen. So that's one reason why they're allowing these natural cover crops. The other reason is that the mustard plant in particular has very deep roots, and they believe that those deep roots help break up the decomposed granite more for the avocado roots to penetrate. And then finally, as these plants die in the summer and they weed whack them down following bloom, you're applying another source of organic matter as this material decomposes. So other innovations or contributions that they wanted me to mention, and I'm very happy to mention, is their collaboration with research. I've had many trials and collaborations with Farm ACW, as well as many people from our entomology department and other departments at UC Riverside in the past. They also have gone heavy into solar. And so they are one of the largest solar operations on an agricultural basis in the state of California. Because they're such a large ranch, they have their own on-farm nursery. They propagate their own trees. And that's been a great boost for researchers like me, because they've propagated many, many trees for me in the past for the breeding program and other trials. And finally, they wanted me to mention their approach to stress mitigation. They have been interested for many years in overhead irrigation to mitigate stress. And back in 2000, we actually did a preliminary trial at ACW to look at overhead irrigation to mitigate heat stress. And we got good results, but it was not implemented at that time at the ranch. And so in this last heat event, you can see that Farm ACW was not spared during this heat event. And they have been looking at installing, since we had that heat event in 2018, they have been looking at options for controlling heat events by the use of overhead irrigation. And so they have been looking at systems similar to what Matt Nelson will talk to you about and what Nelson Irrigation will talk about. But recently what they've done, and hopefully this video will work. Nope. I had a video, let me see if it, oh, here we are. I don't know if you can see up there. Right now, currently, they're looking at using these large water cannon type of sprinklers that they use in like alfalfa that can cover a 1 acre process. So this is something now, another thing that they're looking at, because of the steep hillsides at the ranch, they're concerned that putting in an overhead with every tree may not be very practical for them. So this is something new that they're looking at, and they're looking forward to sharing these results with the California industry as they move forward. So with that, on behalf of Farm ACW, I'd like to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary Lou. That was a good presentation. We have one question that came up that's a very good question. How does Farm ACW take care of weed whacking 515 acres of land?
Well, from visiting there for many, many years, they only do it along where the new plantings are, so that the weeds don't overcome the young trees. Along in the more mature blocks of trees, you don't get too much of the mustard growing into the main portions of the blocks, and it's just along the margins of all the roads they have, and so they just let those grow. So it's really the weed control, the weed whacking is done in the fields where they have recently top worked or stumped or planted new trees. But there's a real effort there to encourage, especially wildflowers and mustard. And you can see the bees, when you go out during bloom, you can see the bees harvesting pollen off of those plants.
I have a question, Mary Lou, back to the mulching. How often or how many times a year are they applying mulch?
What the manager told me is that they go out and they apply it about once a year, about about 12 to 18 inches, keeping it away from the trunk of the tree, but about 12 to 18 inches. So when they've planted a new block, they put the mulch out as they plant the trees.
Okay. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A on your talk.
Well, thank you very much, Keith.
Let me check the chat option and see if we have any there before we let you go.
There is one, Keith. There is one.
With GAP, is chicken manure even allowed in orchards anymore? Is one of the questions on the chat function.
Well, that's a very good question. I believe it must be because they're using it, and I know that I sort of asked the question indirectly. I asked that question when I was preparing the talk, and then I was told it's thoroughly composted. They buy composted chicken manure already, and then it's blended with the other materials.
Yeah, so I think that the answer to that is certified mulches come with a certificate that they have been turned and properly treated to eliminate the risk of any bad bacteria in the mulch.
Yeah, and so I can see that there's another question about the pollinizers. In the case of ACW, because they have their own nursery, they're putting 3 different trees in the same hole. They initially tried grafting the 3 varieties on one tree, but what happens there is that usually the Zutano, which is the strongest of the 3, overtakes the other 2. So they found that by planting 3 in a single hole works. And what you can do when you go out to the older blocks at the ranch, you can see that those trunks eventually sort of merge together. Mm-hmm. But I think it's not necessary to put the 3 in one hole. I think the idea here, the message here is that when you're planning to put pollinizers in your grove, just don't do all Zutano or all Bacon or all Edinger. That you should mix it up a little bit, because you can clearly see some years, and it varies from year to year, that one pollinizer will be in better synchrony with the house than the others.
Good point, Mary Lou. One other question came through on the mulching, and do the leaves decomposing in the irrigation pattern, do they create much mulch benefit? Can you help answer that, Mary Lou?
You mean the avocado leaf?
Yes.
Definitely. I mean, and I had the fortunate opportunity to go to Chiapas, Mexico one time, and we went into some of the native forests where there are wild Persea americana and other related species like Nabigena and Flacosa. And you go into those forests and you can see the mulch is really, really thick, and you find these wild Persea trees, and it's exactly what you see in your grove. The roots were just proliferated right at that sort of leaf mulch soil interface. And you can really see that that's the native habitat of the tree, and that's what the tree wants to be doing.
And then one other question on the chicken manure and the mulch. Do you know what the ratio of chicken manure and gypsum is to the mulch, Mary Lou?
I don't, but I will get that answer and get it to you.
Thank you. So I think we've covered all of our questions from Mary Lou's talk, and we can, if any other questions that you come up with later in today's meeting, we can maybe address those after our final presentation. But I would like to stay on course here and get started with our fresh field facts interview with Zach Rissell from La Patera Ranch. So Sophia, if you can go ahead and play our next video, we can go ahead and get started with that.
Thank you, Zach. I really appreciate your taking the time here with us this morning to learn more about your operations here at La Patera Ranch. You've been general manager, I understand, for a few years here. I'd like to ask you a few questions about how you're operating your ranch.
Sure.
Could you tell me a little bit about how you got involved with this business?
Sure. Well, La Patera Ranch has been going for almost 150 years now. I started in 2015 with the industry. Previous to that, I was living in New Zealand with my family, lived there for 14 years, and I became general manager in 2019.
Okay. And this property here, La Patera Ranch itself, could you tell us a little bit about the history?
Sure. So I am 6th generation.
So great-great-granddaddy Russell purchased this property back in the 1800s, and
It was actually, the family name is Stowe.
Oh,
STW,
Stowe, okay.
Stowe, yeah, but they purchased the property and it's been in the family ever since. Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you could say that this operation has been going on for 150 years. How long has it been growing avocados?
We started planting avocados. I'm not exactly sure of the first year, but it was the early 70s.
So you're one of the original avocado growers in California.
Yeah.
Okay. And could you tell me a little bit about the ranch itself? You've got avocados, but then you have other crops. How many acres?
Yeah, so we have roughly 300 planted acres. The whole ranch is around 715 acres, but only 300 planted acres. As I said, we have 200 acres planted in lemons and just about 100 acres planted in avocados. We have 23 acres planted in gems, and we're planting more gems next year, and the rest Hass avocados.
Okay, so primarily gems and Hass are the two cultivars you're.
Yes, yeah.
What about rootstocks? What rootstocks do you have here?
We've got a mixture. Recently, we've been relying pretty much on the Dusa. All the replants have been on Dusa rootstock, but we've got Duke 7 and Toro.
Some of your older plantings?
Older plantings, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But we've been, the new plantings going in are primarily Dusa.
And that's based on the performance that you've seen of Dusa over the other rootstocks?
Yeah, I mean, we rely on the advice of Brokaw and others to give us information about the yield and the root rot tolerance. So we're pleased with Dusa so far.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, I appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about cultural practices.
Mm-hmm.
What different things are you doing here? And what do you think the effect on your yields those practices have made?
So I think like a lot of avocado growers, we were relying on the trees getting to that big 30, 40 foot height and having the alternative bearing. And over the last 5 or 6 years, we've been employing a lot of the practices that have been industry wide. So you can see here, we're doing pruning and we're managing the regrowth. Last year we started trialing girdling. We girdling this block and 3 other blocks. And we're also doing bloom sprays with jib to try and increase our yields in our fruit set.
So far, how would you characterize the results of those girdling and jib sprays?
Well, girdling, this will be our first crop with the girdling, but the response of the tree was really good. So we're pleased. The jib sprays as well, it's hard to put your finger on exactly how much impact the jib sprays have had, but we had very strong yields. Yeah.
Okay,
So
so it's certainly not hurting.
it's not hurting. Yeah.
Okay,
It's
so
good.
so far so good.
So
huh?
far so good. Yeah. This will be the 3rd year, coming into it when next spring we'll do the jib spray.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Overall, how would you characterize your yields on avocados on a per acre basis?
So it varies, but this year a lot of blocks, and I think a lot of growers. This was a big year for California growers. We had a lot of blocks over 20,000 pounds an acre.
Wow.
Yeah, but sometimes we'll on the off season, on the off years, we'll get down to the 4,000 and 5,000 pounds on some of the older blocks.
Mhm.
But the newer groves that are coming into development, we're trying to manage those so we don't have those
Alternate
big
bearing.
alternate bearing years.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So overall, perhaps 15,000 pounds? Of
Yeah,
acre
I'd
might be
say, you know, on average this year, I need to probably look at the numbers, but we're probably around 15,000 pounds an acre.
Wow, well above industry averages.
Well, it was a good year for us this year. Yeah. So I don't want to say that we're, yeah. I know sometimes I hear of other ranches and I go, wow, look at that. But yeah,
Yeah.
we're pleased with the results this year. Yeah.
Great. And I understand that you've started to use some of the advice given by Gerardo, the
Yeah, he's been
consultant
great.
from Chile.
Yeah, he's been great.
Could you tell me a little bit about how he's impacted your operations?
Well, we had not trialed or experimented with girdling
Mhm.
until we had Gerardo come on and give us some advice. And I think it just gave us that extra confidence about how to do it and what limbs to pick.
Mhm.
And so that was one thing I could definitely attribute to Gerardo's advice, was experimenting with girdling. He's helped our team in-house with pruning training. So we have 6 full-time employees, orchard employees, and he has been really helpful with them, training them on how to prune, how to skirt prune, what to look for when you're pruning. Also, he's helped us out with our fertilization plans.
Okay, and all those things you think have had a positive impact?
Yeah, no, we're really pleased with working with Gerardo. It's been I think it's a great bonus. of,
Great.
Yeah, Index's program.
Let's talk a little bit more about your girdling program.
Mhm.
Could you give us some specifics of the time of year, how deep the cut is, how you go about selecting which branch to girdle?
Well, so obviously you just want to get the bark, and we're still learning, but on this block, for example, I think we picked 2 limbs on each tree. If the tree wasn't healthy, we just left it alone. If it was looking a little bit sickly or wasn't strong with leaf cover, we left it alone.
Mhm.
And yeah, we just wait for that bloom response in the springtime.
Is there any rhyme or reason to which limb you would pick, or is it random?
Well, oftentimes we'll look at the limbs and we'll pick the ones that don't have a strong fruit set to try and generate that strong flower the
Okay.
coming year. Yeah.
And where would that girdle actually take place on that limb? Down low or middle or?
The girdle was oftentimes around chest height, maybe a little bit higher, just depended on the branch. Sometimes if the branch was a little bit lower, it was lower. And obviously you're just taking off that ring around the bark and making that full circle. So.
Okay. In choosing the height, is that more of an issue of convenience or?
Oftentimes it's to do with, you don't want to make it too high. It's going to be hard for the contract girdlers who are coming in.
Right.
So it's more of a convenience,
Okay.
make sure they can work fast and get around the growth, and not take too much time.
Some growers are combining the practice of girdling with pruning, where they'll girdle the branch one year, harvest the fruit, and then prune that branch the following year. Is that something that you're looking to possibly do? Or?
Yes, if we think that the girdled limb looks like a candidate for pruning the coming year, then we'll definitely be marking that. But as I said, this is year 1, so we're learning a lot with this, and so far so good with the response of the tree.
Mhm.
There's some growers who've been doing this for years, and they have a lot more experience. So we're excited so far about how our trees have responded. It was, I think we hadn't done it in the past because we were afraid we might damage the tree, but there's been so much experience, and a lot of the contractors have really experienced crews. So
Mhm.
yeah, just make sure you watch the crews when they go through the grove and check on them often. So.
Okay. With respect to pruning, you'd mentioned possibly adopting that practice of removing that branch after the year following the girdle. Are there other determinations that you make in your pruning program outside of that, and which branches to prune and to the frequency or time of year that you might prune?
We try and get all of our pruning done before the end of July. We're actually the end of June, but this year was the end of July. We look at the flower set on the different limbs, and if the limb doesn't have a good flower set, that's a good candidate for pruning for us.
Okay.
Or if it's a limb that doesn't look very healthy and the rest of the tree does, that's another good candidate for pruning for us.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And do you practice skirting as well, or?
We do. This grove obviously is a mature grove, so the skirts are already pretty high. With some of our younger groves, we've been skirting. Yes.
Okay. With respect to the other crops that you're growing on this ranch, lemons, I understand, is the primary other crop. You'd mentioned earlier about how you're transitioning a lot of that lemon acreage into avocados.
Yeah.
I take it then you're foreseeing the future as being a positive one for avocados?
Yeah, I mean, those transitions, what we like to do here is if we had a grove in avocados, we'll plant it to lemons. And if we had a grove in lemons, we'll plant it to avocados. So we, even though it's, it takes 30 or 40 years to do that, but that's what we like to do. But yeah, I think the future is bright for avocados. I think that, if we can get our yields high and we can get our fruit size high, then I think we're going to stay profitable. And I think California growers are going to stay profitable with avocados.
And then you mentioned that Gerardo earlier had helped you on your fertilization program. Could you give us a little more details on what you're doing there?
Yeah, so some of the things that he advised us on, we have some soils that are very high in the pH. And so we switched our nitrogen source. So we were using UN32, which is, it does have some acid in it, but we went to N-furic to even make it more acidic. We are using Acadian, which is a seaweed extract, to try and stimulate that root growth. So a few different products that he's recommended we try. We're probably going a little bit higher on some of the nitrogen than we typically would have with Gerardo's advice, and we're experimenting with that to see how the trees perform with that as well.
Gotcha. Are you doing soil and leaf analysis periodically?
We do leaf analysis every year around September, between early September, late September. We do soil analysis, not every year, but every other year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your fertilizer program is based a lot on those
On the
results?
leaf analysis, exactly.
Leaf analysis, okay.
Yeah.
And the changes that Gerardo has suggested on the fertilization, are you seeing a positive result as a consequence of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we see are that since we've started employing some of Gerardo's advice, I mean, we've been very impressed with the tree health.
Great.
So, so far, the things that we're doing, working with Gerardo, talking through some of the issues, the trees are responding really well. So
Gotcha.
we're really pleased with the advice. Yeah.
Based upon what you've seen in other groves and cultural practices and the things that you're doing on your own grove, if there was one thing that you could isolate and say, boy, the industry should really be doing more of this, what would that be?
Well, I guess one thing that we want to do more of, which hasn't been an annual cultural program, is applying mulch and working with the soils and really focusing on the soil health of our groves. So we have mulched in the past, but it's going to be much more of an ongoing program with us, and also doing things like planting cover crops to improve the organic matter in the soils. And then another thing we want to do and we're looking at is just really optimizing the irrigation settings and the fertilizer settings. So, we're getting the water to the tree at the right time, the right amount of water, and doing the fertilization program. So we're getting that fertilizer tree as well.
More of a frequently, but not
Exactly.
as much.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
there was some of our younger groves were irrigating and we're fertilizing more frequent. So instead of waiting every 7 to 10 days, we're doing it every 3 or 4 days, and we're applying fertilizer not just once a month, but 3 or 4 times a month to our younger avocado groves.
And you've seen an enhanced response.
Yeah, they're young trees, so they're they're vigorous anyway, and they're ready to grow. But that's what we're hoping to, if we start out that way and we start managing the grove that way, it's easier to keep going.
Gotcha.
Yeah, with management.
With respect to irrigation, currently, what are you using criteria using to initiate an irrigation event? And with respect to how much water per irrigation, are you looking at the soil profile, or what are you using for that?
We have tensiometers in all of our avocado groves. So we just look at the soil moisture readings, and when we think that the grove needs it based on the graphs that we're plotting, we apply the irrigation, and it's going to get hot. It's getting hot right now. So we'll extend the irrigation length from 7 hours to 8 hours on some groves, or 8 hours to 9 hours, depending on the soil profile. We've been using all of our new groves. We've been using double line drip irrigation. So we're converting, from the microjet sprinklers to drip irrigation to help save water.
But then once those trees become bigger, you'll convert those back to the mini sprinklers, or do you plan
No,
on staying on drip?
We're going to stay on drip.
Ah,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
So far so good. And all of the groves all the new developments we're planning on berms with the double drip irrigation. Yeah.
Okay. And those berms you think are a superior way to go?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of growers who don't plan on berms, and their trees are really healthy and they have really good yields. We have a lot of heavy soils in this area, so just getting that root zone a little bit higher, not sitting in, getting it out of the wetter stuff,
Improving the drainage.
and also if we apply mulch and get those roots kind of moving up into the mulch.
So the
get more
combination of
oxygen.
mulching and
Yes.
berming, you think
Yeah.
is a superior method on a heavy soil. Do you have light soils where you've tried berming, or
Yeah, we pretty much, all of the new plantings we're putting on berms,
regardless of whether it's the clay?
regardless of the soil. Yeah.
And in both cases, you're seeing similar responses?
We're seeing very good results so far. Yeah.
So
Our
the-
oldest grove on berms was planted in 2014, so it's only 6 years old.
okay.
So
But as compared to previous plantings not on berms, would you say that your berm trees are doing better?
they're doing, I think so, because we've had some issues with root rot here, where on some of our flatter grounds where we have planted avocados, when we have a big storm event, for example, that might had some flooding in the grove, and then we get a lot of root rot issues with that grove.
Gotcha.
And I think lifting the roots out of that, so you're not going to experience those issues as much.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Zach, going back to your earlier response on soil health and mulching, are there areas where that's been practiced for some time, and do you see a superior response in those areas?
So we've started mulching with our newer groves, the ones that we're talking about on berms. And so far, when you dig back and you scratch back at the mulch and look at the roots, you can see those nice new fresh white fingers growing in. So yes, I think it is a good practice. And we know that the avocado roots are shallow and they like to be, they're up right there near the surface. So improving the organic matter in the soil with the mulch and doing things like that, to improve those things is going to be a positive for the tree.
Great. Well, again, I'd like to thank you for taking a few minutes out of your busy schedule and meeting with us, Zach. And sure, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, John, for your interviewing Mr. Zach Rissel. Unfortunately, Zach had a conflict and was not able to attend our meeting today. The question board, I only see a couple of questions that came up so far. One of them was about their water supply at La Patera Ranch. I think if I can answer that, my experience is, my understanding is that they have a couple sources of water. I think they utilize some groundwater, some well water, and then they also have available municipal water from the Goleta Water District, if I'm not mistaken. Gerardo, do you recall if most of their irrigation is through well water? I think you're on mute, Gerardo.
I'm pretty sure that is most of are coming from wells. Yeah, yeah. I don't know, Giuseppe, if you remember exactly.
Yeah, depending on the year or the time of year, I think most of the water is going to come from groundwater, but they do have some riparian water that they can use,
Thank you, Giuseppe. And another question about the leaf analysis that Zach mentioned that they typically do in September. Was any idea how late that a leaf analysis can be done? And my experience on collecting them for growers that we work with is we've done them as late as the end of October. So we're kind of approaching the end of that window. Fruit Grower Lab has indicated that really they can be done at different times of the year, but I think the general consensus is a spring leaf that has been hardened off in the fall is the best sampled leaf to choose.
Mhm. Mhm. I think now I'm thinking in different moments during the season. It's important. I mean, it could be an option, but you have to create your own numbers. You know, there is no the ratio to compare your result was developed using that you say kid spring flat 6, 7, 8 8 months old. I'm working with grower. We are trying to take samples, you know, after set the beginning of summer flush, but I think you need a long time to create your numbers. I mean, to compare. But I think could be a good tool. I mean, could be a good tool to have more numbers during the season to take the right decisions.
Keith, can I? The current leaf standards were developed at UC Riverside back in the 1960s by Tom Numbleton, Chuck Lavanauskas, and Jones. And if you go into Avocado Source, you can look at some of their older publications where they show that the reason they picked the fall leaf for this period of time in their recommendations is that we have a period of time at the end of the summer into the early fall where the elements in the leaves stay fairly constant in concentration. Whereas in the remaining parts of the year, because you have active flushing or there's other things going on, the nutrients fluctuate. And so it's very difficult, as Gerardo said, that you have to almost develop new standards. But that is the reason why that the fall was selected, given that the leaf analysis is relatively expensive and they got good data, more or less, that correlated productivity and other factors of tree performance with leaf analysis results that you could obtain in the fall. And that's the whole reason why we have those standards and the recommendation to do collect leaves in the fall. But there's been a lot of work around the world, a lot of the work actually in Chile, looking at other times of the year. But that's really sort of the reason, the background of why the original recommendations came from the fall.
Mary Lou, what would you say would be the window that California avocado growers could collect their leaves? Early September to late October, or different time?
I would agree with that. If you go back and look at those publications, you can see that flat point is from, you know, you think the trees are flushing at the end of the summer and then they sort of, the flush tails off into September. So early September to late October, maybe even the very beginning of November would be the window.
Okay.
Gerardo, maybe you can help answer this other question from a grower in Fallbrook. They stumped their orchard about 8 years ago and trees are getting back to height. What is the recommended height that they should keep their trees at and the time of year to do the cutting?
Let me, okay. You know, Kate, I mean, there is a rule, okay? There is a rule that, and it's important to have in mind. The height of the tree we use, we could adjust that, yes, no problem. But the rule is 70% of the distance between rows. Okay, that is only one approach. Okay, you could adjust that, yes, no problem to do that. I will say 70%, but in my experience in California and in other countries, I like to keep 60% of the height of the distance, 60% of the distance between rows, because it's difficult to keep the height of the tree. The natural tendency of the avocado tree is upright grow. I mean, if we look from the evolution of the avocado, the competition with big trees per light, that is the normal way. I would like to say no more than 70%. If we could keep 60%, I mean between 60-70% of the distance between rows will be the maximum height for me. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Gerardo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't see any other questions, and I would like to continue with our next video interview with Matt Nelson to talk about his orchard cooling system that they've set up. So Sophia, can you go ahead and start our next presentation, please?
Matt, I really appreciate your spending some time with us today to tell us a little bit about your operations here. Why don't we get started and tell us a little bit about how you got into avocado growing and how long you've been growing avocados, that sort of thing.
I've been growing since about 98 is when the first ranch was planted, and I didn't take care of it to begin with. It was managed by a company. My dad did this when I was in high school, and I kind of came into it over the years and ended up developing 2 other ranches that are at different locations from the first, and that's how we are where we are now.
And you took over the operations when?
Right around 2004.
Wow, so you've had 16 years of experience growing avocados here in Duluth.
Right.
Okay, great. What cultivars are you growing?
So most of it's Hass. There's an increasing portion that's Lamb Hass and Gem and Carmen and Reed as well. So it's probably 90 at this point, 90% regular
90%.
Hass.
Okay, great. And how many acres is your operation?
Everything put together is just a little over 20.
Okay, so you're a good sized grower then. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about irrigation. How many, well, actually yields and irrigation. Ballparkish in an average year, how have your yields been?
It's been hard to say because we've had so many weather events in the last number of years. We had the big snow. We had 8 inches of snow at the one ranch.
2016.
That was the first day of 2015,
Huh.
and then we had heat waves, 117 degrees and 16, 18, and now 20. So we've had good years in between there, but those events take a
Really
toll.
catastrophic.
Yeah, but on the good years in between, we're 12 to 15,000 pounds an acre.
Oh, good.
Last year, I have 1 acre that I pick of lamb, and that was, we pulled 26 bins off of exactly 1 acre of lamb.
Oh
So
my goodness, over 20,000 pounds an acre.
it won't do that again, but it was nice to have it once. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's well above industry averages, so you must be doing something right. That's for sure. In terms of irrigation, how often are you irrigating, and how many acre feet a year do you think ballparkish you're applying?
So it depends on the ranch. The original home ranch is in heavier clay soil, and that gets in the peak of summer, that gets water about every 4 days, assuming temperatures are pretty normal. Out here, it's more of a sandy DG mix, and this will get water every other day through most of the summer.
Okay.
And then generally we try to follow Simis. Simis plus 20% is where we're at, especially in the hotter months of summer.
Do you feel that 20% is giving you that leaching factor that you need to avoid excessive tip burn? And
Yeah, we've tried to adjust these numbers as the trees get bigger and older, and there's just no replacement for that water.
That extra water. And that's
Yeah.
all district water that has an EC of roughly 0.8, 0.9, something like that?
Something like that. The one ranch has a well that has pretty good water, but yeah, where the older trees are, the taller trees are, it's all district water.
Okay, so like most of the grows out here, you're not dependent on your well, you're
Right.
on the district, gotcha.
Right.
How often do you fertilize and what fertilizers are you using?
So generally fertilizers, I try to get them to go through the irrigation system. I try to, once in the beginning of the year, I try to get the guys out and we'll throw 40,000 pounds of chicken manure, this is organic.
Gotcha.
So try to get the guys out and do that. They don't like doing it. It's a tremendous amount of dirty work, but usually there's not a lot else for them to do at that time of year. I like to do this in January, February. Nobody's using labor for picking, and so we end up just doing it that way. Then through the rest of the year, I end up buying there's some organic liquid or organic powder that you can turn into liquid and inject through. It's a soy-based product. I've had really good luck with that.
Okay. Is that the grower secret product that I've heard about, the soy-based?
The label that I was buying it under was True. It's a
Okay.
True product, but
True Organics. Yeah.
there's multiple manufacturers that make the same thing. It's
Gotcha.
hydrolyzed soy.
Okay. What other cultural practices are you employing? Girdling?
I've tried girdling. I didn't really care for it. I tried it in high density blocks where the wood was a fair bit smaller than your average tree limb. I know it works well on larger limbs, but on smaller limbs, I was doing it on 3 or 4 or 5 inch diameter limbs, and there was, every time a wind would come through, those would really want to break off right where it was girdled. And I was very careful not to girdle too much into the wood, deep into the wood, that would cause that. And so I got tired of seeing that. And generally I try to do some pruning, but I've had a really hard time with Hass, trying to keep Hass reasonable, especially in high density 10 by 10 stuff. Hass is unmanageable in 10 by 10. I think everybody knows that by now.
In hindsight, you would have used a different spacing then?
We're a different spacing or a different cultivar. We're going to go and graft all of that over to lamb, because we've been really happy with lamb on high density. It's been much better, but it still will definitely require pruning by year 10.
Gotcha. And the jury's still out on the gems?
The jury's still out on the gems. I love the way they grow. It holds the fruit really nicely inside, and they're very productive, and they don't, just everything good you've ever heard about them. I think the jury's still out on their tolerance to heat. I don't think they're any more tolerant to heat than Hass from what I've seen and from what I've heard. But they're very productive, and they're very easy to pick. I think it's a great step forward.
Okay. You mentioned the word heat, which is the most interesting part of what you're doing here, Matt. And I'd like to have you share with us what you're doing to mitigate these catastrophic heat events that we've seen. I understand that you're employing overhead irrigation. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Right. So in 2018, we went and planted this block that you see here. And these are all, or most of these are gems. A good number of them are Hass on that side. And in 2018, 6 months after these were in the ground, we got hit with a horrific heat wave of, I think it was 117 or 118. And the poor little trees that were looking really good just got torched. Half of the tree was gone. It just looked like a disaster. And so we decided we've got to do something to get these trees, to protect these trees from this heat, because at that time it was the second heat wave that had happened. We had the same thing in 2016. So what we did here initially was just run poly on the ground and then take a 1/2 inch riser, and we were just cutting them in half, and they're about 10 feet when you cut them in half, and just put a head on top and a stake in the ground. And we would stop all ground irrigation and move to overhead when it got on a day where we would anticipate anything much over 100 or 105. And so by switching from soil irrigation to ground irrigation, you're first of all, not flooding the trees because they stopped taking up water during that period, and you're cooling them from the top. And it seemed to make a tremendous difference. Really a very simple system to begin with. So we've run that system ever since, and just had great results in the heat. I mean, it seems to be really the only way to go forward, because I've had trees that are, we irrigate them with a tremendous amount of water in advance of the heat. Even though the trees will come through the heat and look great, the fruit just bombs off the tree, even if there's not a tremendous amount of visual damage to the tree. And so everybody knows avocados can't handle this. You can't grow avocados in this heat. And so this seems to be the only way forward for us in this location. This is a hot canyon. This is generally the hottest place in all of San Diego County. When you look at the San Diego SDG&E weather stations, we were hotter than Anza Borrego Desert by, I think, 4 degrees that day of the heat. The more complicated part is getting the height for older trees in older groves. But I think with this, we could get up to potentially 30 feet with the use of longer pipes. And I think we probably shouldn't be having trees over 30 feet tall anyway, if we could avoid it.
Well, and at $1,000 an acre, this is sort of no-brainer territory, that when you have a $20,000-$30,000 worth of fruit hanging on that acre,
Exactly.
to spend $1,000, that's really cheap insurance.
Yeah. Mental health insurance as well.
Yeah, most people don't like losing that kind of money.
You know.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your ideas on improving what you've already started.
So the way we've spaced the emitters here, we used an emitter that only throws a 30-foot diameter, which was about as much as I could, as long a throw as I could find at the time. We've since sourced a different head that is used by apple growers. Apple growers also cool from use overhead irrigation to cool the fruit up in Washington.
That's a Nelson irrigation.
This is a Nelson irrigation head, 1.5 GPM, and the published throw is 65 feet diameter. And so it seems like we would be able to use these and use approximately 20 poles per acre. And so each one of these poles cost a galvanized version of this 3/4 inch pole on the right costs exactly $20. And so if we can do 20 of those per acre, that provides, if you do the square footage math on these, that provides probably 10 or 15% mixing, your overlap in between the heads.
Mm-hmm.
And generally the equation is that you want to stay to somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 gallons per minute per acre during the periods of overhead use. And so it would also be possible to shut off certain blocks and rotate around, because the water will stay in the tree and provide cooling for 30 minutes at least after the system is shut off.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's some ways to mitigate pressure and flow issues in a larger ranch.
So most grows, conventional grows right now, with the exception of possibly height control, could take their existing irrigation system and retrofit it to be able to employ this idea that you have
Right.
at $1,000 an acre.
That would be the goal. That's what we're in the middle of doing on everything else out here.
Boy, that'd be fantastic news.
It's a fair amount of work, but it's a fair amount of work working for a whole year to have the crop taken from you.
That's more work.
It's a lot more work. Yeah.
Oh, that's great news. How do you, when you were operating the system, were you operating it consistently, or did you try doing intermittent, turning it off and on?
The day of the extreme heat, I just turned it on at about noon and let it run till about 5. That was mostly because I didn't want to come back out here and turn it off because it was hot. And so, I was moving water around at other ranches. And so it was a great peace of mind to just turn that on and leave and know that when I came back, I was only going to have a weed problem.
Well, I've spoken to the folks at Nelson Irrigation, and they tell me that most of their commercial apple growers don't operate it consistently. They operate it intermittently back and
Right.
forth. So there's no reason to believe that doing that in avocados would achieve the same sort of efficacy.
Right.
You don't get quite the temperature drop as you do if you're operating it consistently, but we don't need to have a 20-degree temperature drop. 5-10 degrees will probably be sufficient.
Exactly.
So
I also noticed that the first day that I came out here, I was a little bit late and arrived and found a fair number of the trees had started to droop over and were showing signs of weakness. I turned the system on, and even within 10 minutes, those trees perked right back up.
wow.
It was really surprising to see them respond that quickly to overhead cooling.
So it's safe to say that you consider this to be one of your better investments, I take it.
This is, nothing else matters at this point. You can be a great grower through the year with irrigation and fertilizer, and then have this heat come along and completely destroy what you've worked for. So this is number one.
Now, this was the first year that you just about a month ago operated this system, correct?
Right.
How would you compare the fruit drop in the area where you operated this overhead irrigation to your other areas?
In here, there was zero fruit drop.
So as if there was no heat event at all.
No heat event at all. The trees, you can see right now, actually have a great flush on them, and they appeared to come out of the heat as almost as if it was a positive event
Oh my goodness.
for the tree. There's zero damage anywhere in the grove at all. And this is a hot. It's hard to get the topography of where we are right now, but we're down in a bit of a hole here, and we don't get much wind to mix up the heat in the middle of the day. And I suspect it was probably close to 120 degrees here for a good portion of that day, and there's literally zero damage on any of these trees.
So you picked one of your worst areas to evaluate this to see if it had efficacy or
Right.
not. And I think another benefit, it's unproven at this point, Ben, but the idea that the avocado tree shuts down typically photosynthesis at around 90 degrees, depending upon temperature, humidity, and cultivar, is problematic in terms of the amount of photosynthate the tree produces to create a bigger crop and larger fruit, all the sort of things that we're looking for. So there's some conjecture that by operating the cooling system during times when the tree would otherwise be shutting off, but you could keep that going, that's going to be an overall benefit, get bigger crops and bigger fruit sizes and more money in your pocket.
Right. That makes sense, John.
Matt, one of the big concerns that we have as an industry is the availability of water to both irrigate the tree and cool the tree at the same time. Many growers are already challenged just being able to keep up with the water demands of the tree while this heat's going on. To add additional water demands on a cooling system, a lot of people are going to think, well, I can't do that. What's your thought about that?
So what we've ended up doing is completely shutting down the soil irrigation during periods when we're going to use the cooling. It's just really not necessary at all at that point. And so we found that the formula that we're using for cooling is similar or less than the amount of water that we'd be using for ground irrigation, given the same size of grove. And so additionally, when you're using overhead, it's possible to rotate, maybe do an hour on one block, an hour on another, or rotate it around in a fashion that would let you get your whole grove in a fairly short amount of time. I think it may even be less than an hour. I think the apple growers are doing something like 10 minutes on,
That's what I've heard.
5 minutes off, or something like that. So it would be a fair amount of work to be trying to change these valves around, but anything is better than the alternative, what we're seeing with crop
Well, I
loss.
suspect through automation that could probably be addressed where you wouldn't even have to be there. It could simply be turned on and then rotate automatically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a small hill to climb compared to the alternative.
And the reason that you're saying that the tree doesn't need water applied to the roots during that time frame is because the tree shuts down anyway.
Exactly.
Transpiration stops, so it's not really needing that water. It's not taking the water up from the roots.
Right.
The key in that case, though, is to make sure that at least 2 or 3 days before you know the heat event's going to hit, to apply a lot of water so you have that reservoir for the plant to tap into when it needs it. But when it's not needing that water, use it to cool your orchard.
Exactly. And a lot of that water that's being used for cooling will also end up in the root zone. So it's not completely lost to evaporation.
Great. What about salinity? I've heard some people raise issues about if you're using a saline water, that when the water evaporates, it's leaving chlorides and sodium and things like that that are going to be assimilated by the tree. Did you experience any of that, or have you seen any issues with that?
Not yet. At this point, we've only run it for a total of 3 days this entire year, and only about 5 hours for those 3 days, so 15 hours in total. And so you can see a small amount of film on the leaf, but it appears to be negligible, and you sure can't see any damage that's resulted from that. It may be an issue if you end up running it for a whole lot more, but I think even still it'll be a lot better than the dead tree alternative that we see elsewhere right now.
Well, I can tell you personally that I've talked to a lot of growers that are scratching their heads wondering whether or not to get out of the business because of all the fruit that they've dropped. And by far, this is the best that I've seen. It's as if no heat event happened at all. You're basically going through this completely unscathed, and it cost you $1,000 an acre and maybe a few $100s worth of water.
I did the math, and it was the cost for running the water on one day was I believe it was $75 for about 2 acres.
And there's a possibility, I understand, that during frost events or possibly the application of foliar nutrients or possibly even pesticides, that this might be another way of utilizing the same technology for a different purpose.
Exactly. It's a helicopter on demand.
That's well put.
Well, thank you, Matt and John. That was a very informative interview. One of the questions that came up that I think has been one of the concerns with growers in the industry, and it may be the way that we're terming this as overhead irrigation may not be the proper way to refer to this, is that the effects of using, we touched on it in the video, but the effects of using saline water and chloride buildup on leaves with excessive use. But you'd mentioned that you'd run it for, I think, 3 to 5 days, Matt, this year. And did you see any buildup or concerns with your amount of use that you had?
Keith, at this point, I've run it for, I think, 5 days out of this whole year. When we were out doing that video, it was 107 that day, and it got run that day, and I think 2 days after that. So, a fair amount of use this year, and I've been out there watching, looking at the trees, looking at the fruit, and there's no, there's very minimal residue left on the leaves from that, and I suspect that rain would take care of it, any that was left. So I at least at this level of use, I would call it a non-issue.
Thank you, Matt. Is there another question? Is there a trigger temperature that you turn the system on at?
I think probably 105 would be a good place to start. Maybe even cooler than that, depending on the on how accustomed the tree is to heat.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like if there's some good if the tree is used to it later in the summer and you live in a hot area, you can kind of get away with it. But if the other heat wave that we had back in 2018, it went from 80 or 85 degrees to 116 in about 2 or 3 days, and the trees were really not apt to deal with that at all. So in a case like that, I'd probably want to turn it on maybe in the upper 90s. I mean, why not? You put the system out there, it's ready for use. So be liberal with it.
Yeah. Another question that we have is, it appears that overhead system, the purpose of it is to increase the external humidity in the orchard. If so, would the ground-based micro sprinklers potentially help with increasing the humidity as a second option? I think that ground sprinklers can increase the humidity, but and Matt, you can feel free to help answer this question, but I think the effects that we're getting from the overhead water is the cooling on the evaporation that's directly in contact with the leaf. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, right. I mean, even on those days where it was 117, I think we still had relative humidity in the 15 to 25% range, which is significantly more than it was just in the last 2 days. I think we were down to 8% relative humidity yesterday, and that's not what hurts the tree. Doesn't really care a whole lot about that, at least in terms of the heat damage. So it's yeah, relative humidity doesn't really enter my mind in terms of protecting the trees from heat damage. It's all the evaporative cooling and getting that water out there to take some of the heat out.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Keith.
We've got another question that backed up to our comment on Gerardo with the keeping of trees at a certain height, but I think we can maybe address that after our presentation with Gerardo, and then maybe after John Rowley's presentation. So I think we've addressed most of the questions directed to Matt's interview. So let's go ahead and
just
go ahead, Gerardo.
Yeah, I want to say something about it. In your that you mentioned could be the micro sprinkler, or normal ground irrigation could be an option. I think yes, it's an option. Second option, sure, is better overhead sprinkler to have the benefit. But I have seen in some avocado growers in California with less damage using the standard irrigation system during the heat wave. Okay, I mean it's an option, but I agree with Matt. It's not the same like overhead sprinkler, but could help. Yes, could help. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Gerardo.
Mm-hmm.
So to move on, I would like to go ahead and get started with your presentation, Gerardo. If you would like to take the stage and go ahead and share your presentation with the group.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeing the?
I'm seeing your screen.
Oh, wait.
Now you're in presentation mode.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Keith. Okay, friends, just yes, I want to talk about the decisions. Okay, I know we have to put together many factors to try to take the right decision about pruning, right decision about fertilization, right decision about canopy management, girdling or no girdling, bees, pollinators, how many beehives, heat wave, freeze, not enough water, market, market condition. Now the price is good for harvest, or I have to wait to get to improve the size. I mean, many factor we have to include in every decision in our growth. Okay, and I want to use the experience in La Patera Ranch to tell you about what has we done, what kind of decision we took in different situations, different varieties, different spacing, and just to help you to use this example. If we look at management, if we look at the more important management that we have to include in our growth, nutrition, irrigation, pruning, canopy management, tree health, they are really very important and all connected. I cannot think in nutrition. I'm not thinking what is the pruning, how much of the canopy I have to remove. It's connected. If I am thinking to remove too much, probably the nutrition, I have to adjust the nutrition. I have to reduce, but sometimes, no, it's not right to reduce, because if I want to rebuild my tree quicker, probably I have to keep the same nutrition, not only thinking in crop. Okay, irrigation, I have to irrigate less if I'm thinking to remove every second row, every second tree. Makes sense, but what happened with evaporation? What happened if the temperature is too high? It's too high, or the forecast say, be careful. This weekend could be more than 100 degrees Fahrenheit, heat wave, winds, dry wind. You know that is really important. It's really important to include everything. Okay, in the decision. Here, for example, this is the fertilization program of La Patera Ranch. What was the decision? The decision was to increase a little bit, just to increase no more than 10% the nitrogen, and to increase the potassium. But look, and always connected with the phenological stage. We know what is the requirement during flower and fruit set. We know the importance of the summer flush. We know that. We know what is happening now in October. Thinking in the next flowering. Okay. Here you can see for me, the first stage. Okay, during the season, flowering. Look here, probably here we apply around 40 to 50% of the nitrogen was applied during April, May, and June. What is happening in that moment in that area? Flowering and set. We saw a very nice amount of flower, and for sure, the idea was to support that energy requirement. Okay, to support the flowers, to support the set, to support the first stage of fruit growth, cell division. If we have a cell division, means tree needs nitrogen. But in the other hand, looking the spring flash, you know, to avoid any competition. But we know it's a discussion. In my opinion, my experience, giving enough support for flower, for set, for a spring flash has been better, instead of reduce, the support, reduce the nitrogen, or don't apply nitrogen to avoid competition. Okay, and you have to know if we are here, we are looking the phenological of avocado, phenology of avocado. But if you think fruit set, flowering fruit set, spring flash, and then we know root flash. And after the first root flash is coming the second shoot flash. That is summer flash. And we know we need summer flash for next flowering. All are connected. There is interaction between every stage. If there was no enough spring flash, means won't be enough root flash, the first root flash. And that means not enough support, not enough energy to get a very good summer flash. And we need the summer flash. We need the summer flash. Thinking in next flowering to keep even crop. If you look here, the decision was looking the leaf analysis, was to apply zinc, 2.5 gallons per acre of liquid zinc sulfate, April and October, to enjoy both root flash, organic matter, mulching. Very, very important on avocado. Very, very important. For me, it was a big surprise when I started to work in Colombia to see soil analysis with 16, 20%, 23% of organic matter. That means beautiful, perfect. And what was the main concern? The main concern was what I had to do to stop the growth of this tree. And when I saw the nutrients on the soil analysis, almost nitrogen, almost nothing, no phosphorus, no potassium, no zinc, no boron. But look at the trees, beautiful, vigorous, healthy, big leaf, big shoot. I mean, was I start to think, okay, always in my weather and in your condition, Mediterranean weather, always thinking nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, zinc, boron are important. Yes, are important. But I was looking the effect on the avocado growth of almost no nutrients, but huge amount of organic matter. Avocado tree likes the organic matter, like mulching. Mary Lou mentioned the benefit of mulching. Really, the avocado tree enjoyed that. If they enjoy, we will have a very good root system with good activity, wide root, very good for uptake, nutrients, water, and good quality tree. Remember, the root growth is the control room, of the tree. Okay, that means the root can send good message and bad message to the canopy. Okay, they really are very, very important. They can produce positive hormones and negative hormones, and it's very important to have a healthy, dense, big root system. Thinking in that, in my experience, seaweed extract can help to improve a little bit more root activity. always you have to think, if you're thinking to use in the beginning of root flash, that is important. And phosphorus, okay? Phosphorus for sure during root flash to improve the root quality. Here, look here again, what happened during July and August. We are by here around 30% of the total nitrogen. Why July, August? Because my concern was too much flower, good spring flash, good root growth, and next, summer flash. I needed summer flash to have the location for flower next season. Very, very important. Okay. For sure, October, November, after to check the leaf result, we did the adjustment for fall and for sure to increase reserve. We know we need healthy leaves, especially in fall. Try to keep the leaves during the winter, but the idea is not to promote too much tender should grow to avoid problem with freeze. Okay. Pruning. We know there is many alternatives. For sure, before summer flash, that is the idea, to try to finish before summer flash, to give to avoid. I don't like the idea. I know some growers using different reasons. Sometimes it's not possible to finish the pruning before summer flash. There is no problem, but we have to change the intensity. We have to adjust what is the idea to avoid to remove too much summer flash. Okay. In La Patera, the general idea, you can see the procedure was in general was select limbs, cut back or removal limbs, remove or cut back the dominants and tall branches, try to reduce the height of the tree, try to put the tree in his space, thinking that in the question before, 70 to 60% of the distance between rows, that is the maximum height. If we are thinking in that, for sure we have to cut lower. I cannot think to cut to use the maximum height for to cut there, because we know the regrowth will be higher. Skirting, and the more important, I have seen many growers that really they did a really good pruning, but without regrowth control, without regrowth maintenance. And finally, after 2-3 years, we have the same tree, the same height, the same dense tree, the same overcrowded blocks. Is really very important. After the main pruning, you have to see, you have to observe what is happening in your trees, and to the natural regrowth after the main pruning. You have to control, you have to maintenance, you have to enjoy that new growth, vigorous growth, to try to put flower on this growth. The idea is not to have again the same size tree after 2-3 years after the main pruning. That is not the idea. Okay. Remove or cut back strong vigorous shoot or water shoot. You have to cut back. If it's too much, you have to remove part of them, especially the dominant, especially the vigorous, the water shoot that are trying to grow to get the maximum light just only for them. That is not the idea. That is not the idea. The idea is if the decision was to make a big window, you have to keep that window open for long time, for really long time. That is the idea, okay? And in La Pachera, the decision was to, in some areas, just in some blocks, healthy blocks, was to use girdling just to check check the response of the tree. If it really we could get benefit doing that. So far looks okay, but the idea is to follow this management and try and for sure to adjust if we need to do that. Okay. Here some examples. That was the idea. You could see the area is crowded. Just one cut to open the canopy. Big window. Try to recover all this section with new growth close to the root system, close to the main trunk. That means always means better fruit quality, better size, instead of to have too high the fruit, difficult to spray, difficult to harvest. That was the idea. Sometimes we have to prune, especially during flowering or during set, especially if we are seeing weak branches, too much flower, not enough leaves. For sure, it's important to cut it midly to take the tree in a good balance. This is an unbalanced tree. That is not idea. That is the idea. Balanced tree. We need leaves. We need leaves. Remember, 15 leaves per fruit minimum. Here the decision was different. We decided to cut only one side, every row, one side of the tree. Try to recover the lower area of the tree, and after to recover, the idea is to reduce the height, but keeping some production. That was the idea. Here, another example, big tree, really big tree, one limb to try to get lower shoot. Again, keeping some production. We need crop to pay the workers for sure. That is the idea. The decision I told you was to do some girdling. Here you can see some examples of girdling. You can see one limb with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 girdling, 5 years. We can use the one. We can use the limb again. Yes, we can use. The first idea was to do in one limb the girdling, and then after harvest remove. But sometimes, especially healthy trees, you could see very good growth about the fruit. That means there is location. That means can you use again the limb? Yes, it's possible to use. Okay. This is a high density. This is 10 by 10 here in California, 10 by 10 or 12 by 10. I don't remember exactly. Here was the girdling. The idea was to try the tree smaller. For sure, the best way to keep it smaller is with crop. Okay, is with crop. No pruning, crop. We need crop to keep the tree smaller and to keep the tree in his space. Here you can see another example. It's a big tree. This is a big tree. You can see 50% of the tree with flower and the other 50% of the tree without flower, but will be plenty of flower next year. That is the idea, okay? Here's a big tree. You can see here some crop, probably 50%, 40% of the tree with crop, and the other 50% of the canopy with flower, okay? So far is the big difference that I have seen, the big difference between success and disaster is not to apply a little bit more nitrogen, less or 10 pounds 10 pounds less nitrogen, or if we apply too much zinc, or not enough boron. The big difference I have seen now between growers is the timing. We have to observe the tree. It's very important. It's really very, very important to prune in the right time, to finish. We know we have to finish before June, but sometimes the market, for example, is not the best, will be probably the best after June. There is no problem. We have to adjust that. We have to think, okay, we have to check what block need pruning earlier compared the other block that really need prune later. Okay, that is really very important. When I have to apply the nitrogen, it's better 1, 2, 3 times during the season instead of every month, instead of every week. It's really very, very important. The timing is very, very important. I can't have enough summer shoot if the spring flash was really low, and for sure the first root flash, I can see few new white root. It's very difficult. It's really very, very difficult. Remember, there is interaction between flowering, between shoot, between root, between crop, or are interrelated. There is we know, I told you, root growth can make hormones to promote shoot, and shoot are making the hormone to promote root growth. That's you have to think in that. We are seeing a season or a big cycle, but inside the season we have small cycles all together. The root during the season are waiting what happened during flowering and during a spring flash. Was enough spring? They are waiting. If it was good, perfect, very nice root flash. And summer flash is waiting. If there is not enough root flash, won't be enough summer flash. That means no flower next season. That means alternate, and you know that. And that is the reason that we have to do. We have to react in the right time, and always allow to implement all the action in the beginning of every small cycle, because we know summer flash, we have July, August, September, only 90 days to get enough summer flash, fully developed in the end of September, hardened off, ready for flower. We have only 90 days, okay? 90 days. That's really very important to know that. And the only way to take the right decision is to be close to our trees. Observation. What is happening? What is happening during flowering? I remember in La Patera, I remember in spring 2019, was spring 2019. We saw in the beginning of the season a huge amount of flower in 2 blocks, huge amount of flower, almost no leaves. And what was my concern? My concern was immediately, what could happen next year? What could happen next year if we are starting this season just flower no leaves. And what was the decision? The decision was we have to apply 40% of the total nitrogen that we were thinking to apply during the season in 1 month. That was the decision. In 1 month, we took the decision to apply 40% of the nitrogen, was 10 pounds of nitrogen per week. 10 pounds of nitrogen per week. Why? Because I know overflowering, no leaves in the beginning of the season sometimes means the next 2 years without crop. 2 years without crop. That was my alternative. My alternative was to give excuses for 2 years or to do something now immediately to try to recover the tree in the beginning of the season, okay? In the beginning of the season. And what was the final result? Good crop and good amount of flower this spring to 2020. That was the result, but only was good observation and right decision. And for sure, we have to think what alternative we have, what is the negative effect of that decision to avoid the for sure to avoid that. But thinking after 1 year, yes, after 1 year, the decision was right. But it's important. But what is important? Observe, and to take the decision immediately. Okay. Just I want to remember you the seminar that Index have done. Really good information. Is a really good quality, probably the best. And you can review the fall management practice to improve spring flower if you want more detail about some management from now during fall. And for sure, for Girling Export Market Gap, Seminar 16 was done in 2016, and you can find all the seminars in our website, indexfresh.com. But remember, now you have to look the trees. You have to take your leaf analysis. You have to check if you need to adjust any nutrients. If you want to try with Girling, just any question, any doubt, just the people of Index Fresh, the field team, they know, they can help you if you want to try. You have to be very careful. It's a good tool, but Matt mentioned some negative effect. The wind is important. How deep is important. How many branches per tree? I mean, you have to adjust that to reduce the negative effect. That is the idea, to reduce the negative effect. There is any tool, nothing to recommend you to say, just do it, just apply. No, there is no concern about the amount of that. Nothing. All any action, any cultural practice have negative effect, and you have to know what is the negative effect to reduce that. Okay, that is really important. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Gerardo. That was a very good presentation, very thorough. I would like to try to speed on to our next presentation to allow John Rowley his Nelson Irrigation presentation, and Gerardo will be on the call, and we can answer any questions that come up from Gerardo's presentation after our final presentation from John Rowley and Nelson Irrigation. So thank you again, Gerardo, and go ahead and take it away, Mr. John Rowley.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Keith. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. And I just maybe real quickly, Keith, do I need to be done in 8 minutes at 12 noon, or what's your schedule?
No, we got a little bit long. I really apologize. So I think if you can maybe do the best abbreviated one you can, but no, we're not going to get kicked off of the line, and people can stay on as long as they would like, John.
Okay, great. Well, again, appreciate.
I can see your screen, but it doesn't look like it's in presentation mode. If that,
Okay, how about
there you go. You're good.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So just to give a little bit of a background, Nelson Irrigation, located in Walla Walla, Washington, we're a manufacturer of irrigation components that are sold worldwide. We design, engineer, and manufacture everything in Walla Walla, Washington. So we're all USA made, and but export a large portion of what we manufacture. Almost 28 years ago, a little less than 28 years ago, when I first started work at Nelson Irrigation, I was asked to become directly involved in some research we were cooperating with WSU on cooling apples. And from that time until now, I've always taken an interest in cooling crops, and particularly apples has been the major driving force for cooling. But there are many other types of crops that are cooled in various ways. We've found over the years that walnut produces better simply by providing full coverage irrigation and the cover crops and the other things that help cool it. Of course, apples are cooled to prevent sunburn. That's the problem that they often have in walnut is sunburn. Cooling in apples is done largely to prevent long-term storage or to allow long-term storage. The internal damage to the apple prevents it from long-term storage. We see cooling in blueberries. Often the objective is to prevent them from getting too soft when they're harvested. The research that Nelson supported 28 years ago involved Robert Evans and Ed Probstein from WSU, and one of their conclusions is that cooling does extend photosynthesis. It prevents the plant from shutting down and allowing that process to proceed into hotter temperatures than it would if cooling was not taking place. In blueberries, a lot of growers cool every day, largely with the objective to hydrate the plant. So you will see them cool even after harvest with that objective in mind. The blueberry in particular will bring a lot of moisture in through its stomata. Other crop cooling examples are in cherry, where we see this primarily in Kern County, California, where they're trying to prevent doubles, or they're trying to enhance bud initiation itself by dropping the temperature in cherries, sweet cherries. Cooling has been experimented with for as long as I've been involved with the fruit industry, as long as the 70s, to delay a bloom in deciduous crops to try and prevent frost damage. That's not widely done, but it is done in some areas on a limited basis. And so today we're talking about avocado and how we might prevent, of course, fruit drop, but perhaps also damage in avocado through crop cooling. When we talk about cooling, I think it's really important to understand some of the thermodynamics of water and how that's going to affect the energy exchange in the environment where we cool. And the key thing here to look at is the differences in these energy exchanges and the amount of heat that's either consumed or released. So when water changes its state from a gas to a liquid, it's going to consume 9,000 BTUs of energy per gallon of water. So a gallon of water condenses into liquid, and that requires that will consume 9,000 BTUs per gallon. Keep that number in mind. The other number that's important to keep in mind is as water cools. So if water changes its temperature or raises its temperature, but as in the case of crop cooling, we're going to take we're going to take a cooler water, and that water is going to increase in temperature. And as it increases in temperature, it's going to consume 83 BTUs per gallon of heat. So 9,000 versus 83. And there was a discussion earlier about, is there benefit to running micro or rotator sprinklers under canopy? Why, in terms of helping a crop that's getting overstressed largely because of radiant heat? And the answer is there's some benefit, but it's about that ratio, about 9,000 gallons or 9,000 BTUs relative to 83 BTUs. That's the thermodynamic equations. That's what you're dealing with there. And that kind of tells the story as to why we need to put water on the crop. You see this picture of a little boy climbing out of a swimming pool. You've all done that before. You've climbed out of a swimming pool on a cool day and you feel that chill. You want to get a towel around you right away. Why do you want to do that? Because water's evaporating on your skin and it's pulling energy out of your body. It's cooling your body rapidly. And so we're going to try, when we crop cool, we're going to try to use that part of the thermodynamics of water, and we're going to try to utilize consuming that 9,000 BTUs per gallon of energy when we cool. And if we cool to do that, then we're more efficient with our effort to cool a crop. So again, the most efficient way to cool is to evaporate water on the leaves or on the fruit. It's going to reduce the heat of what's going to get damaged the most rapidly and the most quickly. It is less efficient to do what's called hydrocooling, which is essentially what's happening when you see the large water cannons being used. Hydrocooling is much less effective because we're just transferring the energy through the change of the temperature of the water. But if we can transfer energy by evaporating water, then we can really make a difference in what we're doing. Two things that we want to do to cool best. We want to distribute the water uniformly. That's another reason why the large water cannons, and we manufacture big gun sprinklers. It's a big part of our business, but it's another reason why the large water cannons are not the ideal approach for cooling, because it's very difficult to use those and also distribute water uniformly. The second thing we want to do is we want to automate the system. We want to cycle the water in and out. In other words, we want to climb in and out of the swimming pool as much as possible with our fruit and with our leaves. We want to let that water evaporate on those leaves and then apply it again and on the fruit, and we're going to be most efficient with our water. Why do we need to distribute the water uniformly? Well, it should be obvious, but part of the water it does make it to the root systems, and with avocados, that may be more so than apples, as I hear about how shallow the root systems are today. But the fruit as well is not cooled evenly unless it's wetted evenly. Again, it's back to that energy equation. Do you want to get 9,000 BTUs out of your gallon, or do you want to get 83? So if you wet the fruit evenly, you're going to cool more effectively. And then much of the cooling that takes place in the Northwest, probably 95% of it is done with our rotator type sprinklers. And we'll discuss some of the reasons why that's the case. We can track how much cooling is going on, and I can tell you, because of the number of sprinklers we sell, and I can tell you that cooling is not an experimental thing in apples in the Northwest. There are somewhere between, over the last 15 years, 5,000 to 10,000 acres of cooling systems installed every year in the Pacific Northwest for apples. This is a major effort that goes on to grow apples in the Pacific Northwest. So how do we automate our systems? There's lots of ways to automate systems. Nelson Irrigation has a new wireless technology that really makes cooling in older orchards much more feasible. And we currently have approximately 300 of these systems deployed in the Northwest. and nearly every single one of them is used to cool fruit. We have seen over the years that most growers gravitate towards operating these systems with a 50% on time and a 50% off time. And if you track core temperatures, at least on apples, while you're cooling, they find that about an 8 to 12 minute cycle is a long enough period of time to run the system, to get enough water out there and to start that evaporative process and then shut it off. So it's frequent, it's rapid cycling of these systems that's usually most successful. This is just a little illustration of our wireless technology. It includes a 900 megahertz radio system that sends signals out to what we call a twig V. The twig V is located at the valve. It has an internal antenna on it. It can be placed up on a post. Repeaters can be used to get around all your different hillsides that you guys farm on. And it utilizes either a cell phone or a tablet as the user interface. So the cell phone or the tablet is used by the irrigator to schedule his cycles and start and stop his cycles, either with a timed start or a manual start. I have to add a little caveat on this. Most of the individuals that operate cooling systems in the state of Washington have less than a high school education. Most of them speak Spanish, and most of them carry some type of a phone that's a smartphone. We've developed a very simple to use and program interface for these irrigators to operate these systems. And it's been very successful. It's working very well as something that's simple and easy to use. Now, when you're cycling these systems on and on rapidly, you need to hold the water in the system. If not, you're going to take about 3 to 4 minutes to pressurize the system, and it's only going to run 12 minutes. So to get around that, we employ check valves, and we offer a mini drain check and a mini drain check regulator. In your steep slopes and where you're going to have lots of hydraulic challenges, the mini drain check is likely to be the best product to use in most avocado sites in Southern California. Now, how much water do you use? How much is required? I think it was mentioned earlier that Matt thought he was using 25 gallons a minute per acre. That's the low end of what apple growers use, but there are many that are using 25 gallons a minute per acre. If that rate is used, most will run the system continuously. They will not cycle on really hot days. If you're going to cycle, typically you're going to want to plan more in the 30 to 40 gallon a minute range. And again, if you cycle, you know, if you run 40 gallons a minute and you're half on, that's a net 20 gallons a minute. If you run 25 gallons a minute and you're continuously on, then you're actually using more water. And you're probably more effective than to run 30 gallons a minute, be half on, or 40 gallons a minute to be half on and half off. If you're running lower application rates, a lot of times those are more successful by starting them at lower temperatures and extending them into longer run times as well, simply because they don't have the capability to bring the fruit temperature down. When the research was done here in Washington 28 years ago, one of the things they established was on a 100-degree day to drop the core temperature of an apple down to 85 degrees, they needed to have 40 gallons a minute per acre cycled on and off. They needed at least that much water. So one thing that you'll see, and if you jump on Google Earth and look at the apple growing regions in Washington, you go to Mattawa, Royal City, even up around Wenatchee, Basin City area, all those apple growing regions in Washington, you're going to see a whole bunch of water reservoirs. Nearly every 100, 200 acre parcel of apples is going to have a reservoir that looks something like this. And the reservoir enables the cooling. It supplies an on-demand system, a reservoir like you're looking at here, which is approximately a 3-acre reservoir. It's going to provide enough water to keep about 800 acres of apples cooled, half on, half off at about 30 gallons a minute per acre. So the reservoir is going to fill during the night and during the time period that they're not cooling. And then it's going to be draining while they're putting all that water out on that large acreage. How do you choose a sprinkler for cooling? We've seen the gamut of all types of sprinklers used over the years. We'll offer you a few little tips. One, use something that doesn't vibrate. So your impact sprinklers are not a good choice. They're difficult to mount, expensive to mount, difficult to keep them reliably turning. You're going to want to use either a spinning type device, something like our S7 spinner, or a rotating device, which is what's used in 99% of the cooling in the state of Washington. You want something that rotates fast, less than 40 seconds to make a rotation. And then you want something that has smaller droplets. So we see mostly our R5 and our R10 and our R10T used for cooling. Over the years, a lot of R2000 and R2000WF, larger model sprinklers that could be spread out further were used, and growers have gravitated away from those. They still use some of them, but the wide majority of growers have moved to the faster rotating sprinklers with the smaller droplets. For avocados, my suggestion has been that you use our R10T. That's the same sprinkler Matt Nelson was showing in his video, with a 24-degree plate and a flow control nozzle. That's real important for your hills. And we make those with a 1 gallon, a 1.5, or a 1.25 gallon minute flow control. You're going to place that on about a 30 by 40 or a 40 by 40 type spacing. It was leaf burning was talked about earlier. I took this picture on a visit to an orchard with John Cornell just recently. This particular orchard had been cooled 65 days this year. They had a little bit of burning like this, and this is caused from it's caused mostly from your deposits of salts on the leaves, which are often held on the leaves by high bicarbonate in the water. And then that's going to create burning. And we've seen apple orchards that become completely defoliated. And so orchardists have to carefully choose their water sources and make sure that the water is not going to burn the leaves. That's going to be an issue. How do you mount the sprinklers? Well, in Washington, nearly all the apples are on trellises, and so they use the trellis structure to mount the sprinkler. I'll just flash through a few examples here. There's a PVC pipe that's attached to a V trellis. Here's examples of PVC pipe attached to wooden posts. Here's an example of a system where the sprinkler is attached to a T-post. I think that might have been what Matt was showing as a T-post. And so that's an option. Here's a cooling system in blueberries where, again, the sprinkler is attached to a T-post. One of the things that we've seen over the years, and one thing that I would caution is, for many years, growers in Washington used systems that deliver the water to the sprinkler with PVC pipe. And the negative to that is in most of our water sources, we have small amounts of algae coming through the water. That algae then grows on the exterior or the insides, not the exterior, the interior wall of that pipe when you're not operating. So you go 4 or 5 weeks without operating, and then all of a sudden you turn on your system and you've got a bunch of algae in there, and that algae plugs your nozzles, and then you really have a challenge. And so many growers are gravitating more to something I'd like to show you, which is a system where they use a flexible black PVC to deliver the water from the ground up to your sprinkler. So I have just a little video here. Keith, do I have time to show this video still, or you think we okay with that?
Yeah, go ahead and play it. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll share this video. Hopefully the technology is going to work as I hope it does. And this is just a demonstration of how this black flexible PVC pipe can be used, possibly in an avocado.
Hello, my name is John Rowley. I'm a product manager at Nelson Irrigation. Today we're going to demonstrate how to hang a rotator up in a tree for a cooling application. This might work well in apples or avocados. First, let's go over the different parts that we're going to use to accomplish this. We'll start with the flexible tubing, PVC tubing, 10 millimeter, which is right here. This is a coil of 500 feet. We have a check valve. We have a Nelson rotator, R10T. We have an adapter for 3/4 inch PVC pipe.
I think we lost audio on your, unmute your screen,
We'll use a
John.
punch tool to
There we go.
the polyethylene lateral pipe. We'll use some crimp clamps, in this case, a 33 millimeter or 1 inch crimp clamp. We will use the crimp clamp tool, a pair of side cut clippers. We have a regular household spoon here with holes in the bottom of it. You'll see how that works. We have a pot with hot water. The water temperature just above about 110 degrees. We also have some steel rod stakes. This is 1/4 inch steel and another item that Nelson Irrigation can supply. So we'll just start this process by first preparing the tubing. We need a length that takes us from the ground up to the top of the tree, really a couple feet above the tree. And so in this case, we're gonna cut a piece of tubing that's approximately 16 feet long. So I'll use the side cut clippers to cut the tubing. Then over here we have the fittings that have been in hot water. Again, almost 110 degrees. We're going to take one end of the tubing and put it in the water for about 10 seconds. And I'm dipping it in the water only about 3/4 of an inch. Then I lift one of the fittings out of the hot water with my spoon. And with the fitting being really hot and the end of the tubing being really hot, it just slips right on. It's real easy to push on. Now I'll do the other end of the tubing. So again, I'll take the tip of it. This time, because it's the LTO, only about 3/8 of an inch of the tubing will be placed in the water for about 10 seconds. Then I remove the LTO with a spoon. And again, it will, with both parts being very hot, it will slip on there relatively quickly and easily. This time I use a little bit of twisting motion to get it all the way on. So now I have my feeder assembly assembled. I'm going to take it and thread it into a piece of 3/4 inch Schedule 40 PVC pipe. This piece is 5 feet long. I'll thread it in from the top down, I guess, like this. So the LTO is going through the pipe. We'll thread it all the way through the pipe. This just takes a minute. And the fitting, the PVC stake adapter fitting here that we have on this end of the feed tube, just slips right over the end of that pipe. The next step is to place the check valve, a 20 PSI check valve on top of that adapter. That's an Acme thread, so it just spins on with a couple turns quite quickly. And then the R10T rotator. This is an R10T with a 1 gallon a minute flow control nozzle. So with those steps completed, now we make a hanging apparatus so we can hang this up in the tree. And I have any place that you can find to anchor the steel, you can use to bend the steel stake. So in this case, I'll just use this camp stove and first bend it in a U shape at about approximately 4 or 5 inches down from the top. Then I'm going to take it and bend it in the opposite direction now. And again, I'll use this as a support, so I can go ahead and bend that. Bend it all the way down in an opposite direction. Now I have that bent into somewhat of an N shape. And we'll use this to mount the PVC pipe up in the tree. Okay, so the next step is to take the 1-inch Oettinger clamps and to thread them onto the center portion of this hook that we've bent out of the 1/4-inch steel. And then we want to thread that through the black 10 millimeter flexible PVC tubing. So we thread that through that tubing, and we want to come up across the bottom of the PVC pipe, the 3/4-inch PVC pipe, and bring it up such that one clamp is at the bottom of the hook and another clamp is at the top. And we're going to bring that to somewhere around the center of the PVC. Next step is we're going to take our crimper tool, crimper clamp tool, and we're going to secure those clamps onto the PVC. So that crimps it nice and tight so nothing can slide around. And so now my hook is very stable. It's not going to move in any particular way. Now we just go up a ladder and we can hang our sprinkler up in the tree. The next step is to hang the sprinkler mounted to the PVC pipe up on a branch, allowing the sprinkler to extend up above the top of the tree. The last step is to connect the 10 millimeter feeder hose to a polyethylene lateral pipe that brings water to the tree. We use a punch tool, hand punch tool, to place a proper sized hole in the polyethylene lateral. Then the barbed fitting pushes into the polyethylene pipe and creates a sealed connection.
Okay, I think I have stopped my share screen. Can everybody, am I heard still?
Yeah, we have audio.
Great. So just would share with you that particular method of hanging a sprinkler up in a tree is widely used by pear growers who use overhead sprinklers to wash off a pest called Scilla. They use very high application rates, like 80 gallons a minute per acre, but they use that same equipment. And I've had a lot of questions from various avocado growers about, okay, how can I mount these sprinklers up in a tree and not cost a lot of money? And the materials that you saw there, probably less, grower cost, probably less than about $3 or $4 a tree. So, and then plus your sprinkler costs. So it's a pretty inexpensive way to do it. And it's something that's been used for quite a while by the pear growers up here in Washington. So that kind of wraps things up for what I had to share today. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about cooling and hope that it can be something that's successful for lots of growers that perhaps need to start considering it.
Thank you very much, John. That was a very informative talk. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions. You talked about the cost per tree on some of the supplies on your example. What is the actual cost in quantity of the R model sprinkler that you were using?
Yeah, the R10T, those are going to cost growers approximately $4.75 each, right in that range. That piece of steel is roughly $1. Sometimes you might be able to supply it less somewhere. The crimp clamps or the Oetiker clamps that we used there, that's approximately, those are about 20 or 30 cents each. All of those items are readily used by irrigators in the state of Washington. Most any orchard irrigation supplier in the Western United States is familiar with crimp clamps. They're familiar with polyethylene tubing. They can source our materials. So those things, the nice thing about all those materials is you don't have to have anything, custom made. You can just buy them and off you go.
Not to put you on the spot, what about the cost for the connection that attaches right to the 3/4 inch PVC that the sprinkler goes on?
That little fitting that went up there, it's roughly, these are rough numbers. I don't have them all in my head, but it's roughly 70 cents.
Okay.
The one on the bottom's roughly 45 cents. The tubing itself is going to be about 20 cents a foot, something like that, in that magnitude. So depending on how much you need.
I can't tell you how nervous you made me when you were bending that piece of steel next to that hot water.
Yeah, that probably should have been turned off. That video was quickly made yesterday. So
You did a nice job. And then is that, we talked about us recording this and posting it to our website. Do you have that video available on YouTube anywhere, John?
I can either have it posted on YouTube, or I could also, and maybe send you a link. I could get it posted on YouTube today and send you a link. I don't think it's posted yet because we just made it yesterday. But
okay, well, we can maybe talk about that offline.
We could also get you a link to it, probably, so you could download it.
Video will be posted up to our website.
We have a. I'm sorry, Sophia. Go ahead.
The video will be included on this presentation once it's posted up to our website.
Okay. We have a couple questions, John, about the operating range of the PSI on the sprinklers, and are they pressure compensating sprinklers? And I thought you maybe had a separate piece that was the pressure compensating part. What range do they operate at?
That's a great question. They are pressure sensitive, and we would strongly advise anybody putting systems in to get a designer involved that can look at the hydraulics of their lateral pipes and their main lines and everything. We want that sprinkler to be in a range. We want to target a range of 30 to 40 PSI. And there's lots of ways to do that. I won't go into all those details, but at the sprinkler head, as it sits way up on top of that tree, whether that's 20 or 30 feet in the air, I'm not sure how high that's going to be, but up there at that height, you want to be between 30 and 40 PSI. And that often takes some good engineering effort to get that right on rolling hills.
So the R10T, what is the diameter of that again? And approximately how many sprinklers per acre is an estimate?
Great. A great question. I didn't fully answer your first question, so I'll finish that out. I am suggesting that our flow control nozzles be used in your topography because of your rolling hills. What the flow control nozzle does is it gives you the same flow over a range of pressure. So if someone puts a system in and one sprinkler at the bottom of the hill is running at 45 pounds and another sprinkler at the top of the hill is running, let's say, at 25 pounds, both of those sprinklers will deliver the 1 gallon a minute with that flow control nozzle in the sprinkler. The number of per acre in what we're suggesting is going to range from about 35 to 40 of those per acre. And of course, your tree spacings are going to dictate that, but something right in that range. Did that answer all the questions, or did I miss one still?
I think it did. Now, your example, I was impressed with how quickly that went together. That is something that, keeping the cost and labor down is very important in this project. if we're in a taller orchard, can a grower use a longer piece of PVC and eliminate moving a ladder around in the field on hillsides? Do you have any experience with different lengths of the PVC pipe?
You know, as long as they can get that to hang in the tree in some way so that it stays in a vertical position, the length of that pipe could be as long as anybody wants. I think the, you know, growers are pretty ingenuitive, and they also can come up with poles with hooks on the end of them or with grippers on the end of them to lift those up in the tree and bring them down out of the tree as well. So I could see where ladders could possibly be eliminated there if they want to do that. You know, the trade-off there is the longer that piece of PVC is, the harder it is going to be to thread it in a vertical position up and down the, you know, keep it in a nice straight vertical upright position. That's the key there. That's our primary goal. But the length of it really doesn't matter. They may need to go 6 or 8 feet just to get it from the hook point to extend up above the top of the tree. So that's going to kind of be worked out as individuals develop their systems for that, I think.
So if you have a longer bottom half of the PVC, you're going to get a cantilever effect, and it's going to be more difficult to keep it
straight.
Yeah.
Yeah. The longer it is, the harder it is going to be to weave it through all those branches and twigs and leaves and keep it straight. I think that's the challenge you're going to have. Whereas the black tubing that comes out of the bottom of it, it can weave any direction it needs to and curve and twist, and it's flexible PVC just for that purpose, so that it has that ability to move around where you need to get it.
I think you said that Nelson supplies all the parts in that example. Does that include the that quick clamp that you used, the stainless steel clamp?
That's a great question. That's a very common item that we do not supply, the crimper clamp. They're made by Oetiker. They're made by 2 or 3 other companies. It's a 1-inch clamp. We do not supply that. We also do not supply PVC. We're not a manufacturer of PVC. All the other components that were shown in that example, we do supply.
Okay. Well, thank you again very much for your presentation, John. There was a lot of good information there that I think growers can put into action in some applications in the field. I think we covered all the questions. I think we can adjourn today's meeting. It went a little bit longer than we anticipated, but there was a lot of good information and a lot of good questions. So I want to thank our attendees for taking the time to listen in on today's meeting and for your questions that you submitted, and then extend our thanks to our field staff for helping out with the meeting today, and for our panelists, Matt Nelson, Mary Lou, John Rowley, Mr. Gerardo Aldanate, and John Cornell for helping out with today's meeting. So thank you again, everybody. We will post this meeting to our website. We'll be utilizing this format for future meetings. One requirement and a bit of information to share is this webinar version of Zoom requires a registration. And before we leave, we always have an open policy for anybody to attend, but moving forward with these meetings may require registration before the seminar. So just keep that in mind as you see future invitations for our Zoom meetings. So thank you, everybody for your time, and have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.